Chinese President Xi Jinping has received former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. The two met in the same state guest house where Kissinger first met the then-Beijing leadership over 50 years ago. Kissinger's talks back then played a key role in the U.S. and Beijing normalizing relations. Washington says this visit is private, but it comes amid a series of high-level meetings between U.S. and Chinese leaders aimed at diffusing tensions after relations hit a low point earlier this year. At his 100 years of age, Kissinger is still a diplomatic heavyweight. The White House has expressed regret that Kissinger got more of an audience in Beijing than some sitting U.S. officials. Aaron Friedberg is a professor of politics and international affairs at Princeton University. In Getting China Wrong, which came out last year, he argues the West's strategy of engagement with China has failed. Welcome to the day, Mr. Friedberg. Now, this is, of course, being billed as a private visit, but what can Kissinger do to help diffuse tensions between Washington and Beijing?
I don't think he personally, in his conversations, is going to do anything to change the nature of the relationship between the two sides. His visit may be a prelude to further talks between U.S. and Chinese officials. But the U.S. side doesn't need Dr. Kissinger to deliver any particular messages. I think the Chinese side, frankly, is using Dr. Kissinger's visit to put some pressure on the Biden administration to try to get it to soften some of its positions towards China.
How so?
Well, they know that there will be a lot of attention paid to the visit in the West, in the United States, that many people will say, why aren't we talking more? Why aren't we cooperating more closely? Why aren't we trying harder to get along? We should be doing what Dr. Kissinger is doing, and that will perhaps press the Biden administration to be more forthcoming. I don't think that's likely to be successful, but I think that's the theater that's being played out here.
Mm-hmm. And as part of that theater, Xi Jinping said today, China and the United States are once again at a crossroads, and both sides must once again make a choice. He went on to talk about joint success and prosperity that was possible, according to him. Now, can we read anything into the fact that he didn't say the problems are all a making of the United States?
I wouldn't read too much into it. And in other contexts, the Chinese side continues to make statements that put all of the responsibility for current tensions on the United States. But I think Xi Jinping has an interest in trying at least to appear to be willing to talk and to be reasonable. And if he can, to cast the U.S. side as the source of the difficulties. Again, put pressure on the U.S. to make concessions.
Mm-hmm. If you say that it's part of a theater, the visitor of Kissinger, why would he lend himself to this kind of an act?
Well, I think he sincerely believes in the importance of improving relations between the two sides. He's played an historic role in establishing relations between the two sides. So I think it's genuine on his part. He believes that he can be helpful in that regard. And of course, it's very flattering to him. Of course, it's remarkable at age 100 that he can go and do this, but puts him in the spotlight, calls attention to him and to his ideas. But I think he genuinely believes he's helping to smooth relations between the two sides.
Now, recently, we saw Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Beijing, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, the climate envoy John Kerry, and now Kissinger. How are all of these attempts to mend ties, presumably, perceived in China?
I think the Chinese side would like to pick interlocutors that they believe are more favorably disposed towards them. And of the Americans, apparently they think Blinken is better. Blinken is tougher than Yellen, so they'd rather talk to Yellen than to Blinken. And Kissinger, of course, is most favorable of all, although he's not an official. I think what they see is that the U.S. side is very eager, at least, again, to appear to be willing to sit down and talk. And they're happy to have that display. I think there will be some visits by Chinese officials in the United States, but the fact that it's been U.S. officials knocking at the door puts China in the appearance, at least, of a stronger position.
Mm-hmm. What is the West still getting wrong about China?
I think there's still a reluctance to recognize the full extent of China's ambitions. There's a tendency, and this conversation over the importance of this visit or upcoming talks is another indication of this, to see the sources of the difficulty between the United States and China, or China and the West, as lying in misperceptions, misunderstanding, miscommunication, rather than the deeper ideological and geopolitical sources that I think are propelling the rivalry between the two, and are going to continue to do so regardless of whether there are or are not high-level talks.
Yeah, talking about these ambitions, the U.S. is promising not to stand aside on the Taiwan issue or any other Chinese territorial ambitions. So what is it going to take to make sure the threat of a military confrontation doesn't become a reality?
I think it's a number of things. On the one hand, I do think it's important for the United States and its allies in the region, and also elsewhere in Europe too, to send a very strong message of deterrence to Beijing, discouraging it from trying to resolve the Taiwan issue by using force. At the same time, it's important also to indicate a willingness to establish emergency communications, to avoid misunderstandings, to make clear that the U.S. has no interest in pushing this issue further in a way that would be threatening to Beijing. So we have to walk that line, but we have to strengthen deterrence.
As Aaron Friedberg of Princeton University, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.